Welcome to the ABOP podcast. ABOP is the Alliance of Black Orchestral Percussionists, a nonprofit organization that focuses on mentoring future generations of Black percussionists. My name is Raynor Carroll. I am an ABOP founder. Thank you for joining our podcast. This episode, Sound Investments, focuses on how to build an inventory of concert percussion instruments, where to start, and which instruments to include. Check the program notes for this episode for additional information, including a categorized list of instruments and accessories. Joining me on this episode is Terry McKinney. Terry is principal percussion with the Baton Rouge Symphony and an ABOP mentor. Terry, welcome to the ABOP podcast.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
So, sound investments. I think this is a good play on words, with sound meaning healthy and sound in the sense of sound waves, what we hear. Both are important. We want to acquire good quality instruments that create the sound we like. So, as a young percussionist, some questions regarding instruments might be, what instruments should I purchase? What do I need now? What should be my priority? How should I purchase them? So, Terry, I think you would agree, everyone has different needs. So it's not necessarily any one instrument or instruments for any one person, but it depends on where you are in your studies, what you already have. Hopefully you have something. You got your snare drum sticks at least. So
Hopefully.
Yeah. So let's start with possibly, and it's not in any particular order, the top, let's say 6 or 7 instruments to acquire. So I would say and good is relative, a good concert snare drum,
Yes.
And I would say a 5x14 in general. It could be a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, but the reason I say 5x14, if you have one snare drum, if I had one snare drum, that's the size I would get because it's a good full sounding drum and yet it can play some softer things, not as great as a piccolo and not as robust as, let's say, a deeper drum, but it's just in the middle.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I think just like you said, with that size drum, you get the best of both worlds. I tend to consider a piccolo more like a specialty instrument that it's used for a few instances, but it's not the general go-to sound I would want. Same thing for a deep shell 6 or larger, a larger, deeper drum. But a 14 is great. I mean, you play soft. You get big full sound depending on if you get a metal shell or a wood shell. Yeah, I agree completely.
And then as far as a mallet instrument goes, I would think a xylophone would be a good all-around instrument to have for an orchestral percussionist. You're not going to get a lot of calls for a marimba in an orchestra. Yes, you need a marimba, yes, but I think a xylophone is a lot more useful. What do you think?
I agree. That was actually my first keyboard purchase before I got my Glock after that because I could cover learning the Glock rep on the xylophone.
Yeah.
And if I needed it more, I have a marimba. But if I needed a marimba to do some work, I could go to the local high school or wherever. But a xylophone, again, I think it's one of those instruments that you can get a lot done on it.
Yeah. There are a lot of good instruments out there too, a lot of good xylophones. And then depending on the range, some of it, can cover a lot of the range you will need too. So
yeah.
Next, crash cymbals. And the size can vary, but if I had to get one pair, it would probably be 18 or 19-inch cymbals. I tend to go with slightly larger, but I think the larger I get, the more it's going to suffer on the more I'm going to suffer on a Sousa March where I'm playing every note. That gets tough. And or if you have to play some of those soft excerpts like the Rachmaninoff, etc. So 18, 19, if there's one pair to be had of crash.
Yeah, my first pair I wanted 18s, but I think I actually got 19s. I got 19s, and then my second pair were a pair of 17s that I had to play trike for, and I was worried. I didn't want to use the 19s. I can't remember for what reason, but I used the 17s, and they actually had a very big full sound for 17s.
Yeah.
When I listened back to the playback. So
yeah,
19s, 18s are the way to go, I think.
Yeah,
for sure.
And we'll go on this subject a little bit further later, as in we want a variety of instruments, ideally, but again, we're going if you can only get one of each of these
Right.
categories. So
Yeah.
obviously, it's great to have a smaller pair for those softer and or those fast passages, whether it's Night on Bald Mountain or the Coda from Tchaikovsky Fourth, et cetera, et cetera. So
Right.
we got to have a triangle. You got to have a triangle, at least, of course. Again,
Yes.
we'll
Yeah.
talk about multiple later, but whatever medium size, whether it's 6 inch, 7 inch, 5 inch, somewhere in that range, not really small, not really big, but something that again is a good starter for you would be, I think that's be a must for every percussionist.
And I know some people have to decide, are they going to get the steel triangle, or are they going to get the copper, or the different types of metals? Do you have a go-to
Well, I do now.
triangle?
When I was a student, no, it's the only one that
Yeah.
I started with a particular triangle, and that's what I used for a while until, again, I pretty much covered everything else. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, now I can start diversifying. I don't have to use this one triangle for everything. But no, I like to have a variety. So
Yeah.
it depends on the passage. That's what I would say. It depends on the passage of what I would use. If I'm doing some of the Germanic repertoire, I would think of a darker, heavier sound, maybe a larger triangle. And the opposite spectrum would be some of the lighter things, whether it's French and is in Debussy or whatever. Then a 6, 5, or 4 with a brighter sound, perhaps.
But
But
yeah.
it's always specific to the repertoire, you know. And that's when it comes in the experience in playing a wide range of repertoire. You need a wide range of all the instruments, not just triangle, tambourine, everything, snare drum. If you're in a concert band, for instance, and you do a lot of Sousa marches, et cetera, then I would say your go-to snare drum is going to be a lot deeper. It's
Mhm.
going to be more of 6.5, whatever, 8 by 14, 8 by 15. And then I'll just go ahead and say, if you're playing in a group that does a lot of Strauss waltzes, a lighter snare drum would fit with that, a shallower shell drum. So,
Yeah.
it's kind of specific to what you're doing. And again, if you're just starting out, just go in the middle. It's just
Yeah.
like playing an audition. Don't play the fastest, don't play the slowest. Just be steady and play in the middle of
Right.
the tempo. You're probably safe with that.
But I think with the triangle, one good triangle would do, but a good set of different size beaters, and not just one
Oh,
beater.
yeah. 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 We haven't
Yeah.
mentioned that. And with all of the instruments, obviously, you need to have a variety of beaters, mallets, because no one triangle beater is going to be the all to use. So yeah, that again, you have to decide how to spread your money out because I always say you don't want to go into debt buying instruments.
Hmm.
You want to gradually build as you're getting more work, then okay, you invest a part of the money you make into, again, this is the sound investment into your instruments.
Right.
Don't just take a lot of the money that you make and spend on this, that, and the other. Actually set aside a specific amount for your future, for buying more instruments, because that makes it easier. If you have the
Yeah.
money when something comes up, whether it's of a percussionist that's selling their stash of accessories, and it's a one-time thing, and you don't want to have to pass up on that if you don't have the funding. So try to keep a percussion fund on hand.
Yeah.
Then I think we would say the same for a tambourine. If I had to buy one, it would be a combination jingle. So it's not all of one type, but it's a couple different jingles that'll give me a sound of this and a sound of that, as opposed to all bronze or all silver or all chrome, etc. It's something that's a combination. I like the calf head. Maybe a plastic head might work best and all around, whether you're doing a lot of outdoor concerts or whatever. But again, if you just to have one, for me, it would be a combination jingle.
Yeah. I agree. And I think for some people, at least myself living in the South, because I like the calf skin as well, but because of humidity issues, some people may want to opt for the plastic
Yeah.
or the synthetic if it holds well, if it has a good sound. But it's a good thing that there are a variety out there on the market for
Yeah.
that to be considered.
I think you would say the same, Terry, versus when we were in school. There's so much more out there now available, even as a professional. But as a student, I think there's a lot that's affordable. I mean, there's a lot that's really expensive, but there's a
Yeah.
lot that's affordable now. So it's great to have those options, those choices. And in speaking of when you're searching for something, I definitely wouldn't start with new. If you're on a budget, perhaps start with something that's used, whether you're hearing again through colleagues or you know of a player in town that is moving and they're getting rid of stuff or whatever, or they're retiring. That's a good place to start. There's plenty of great used instruments. So it's
Oh
not that
yeah.
you have to start off by buying a lot of this at the market price. So, I mean, that's how I got started with a lot of my instruments. Just hearing about this guy selling a xylophone, this person selling their triangles or whatever. And it sure makes it a lot affordable when we're starting off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. There's so many different places to, I mean, with technology and being connected online, there's so many different resources to tap into. I mean, that didn't exist, a decade,
Yeah,
2 decades ago. So
right,
it's great
right.
that students can take advantage of that.
Yeah, I'm at the part of in my career where I'm not really acquiring. I'm trying to actually let some things go, which is very difficult. But I know it used to be years ago, it was eBay that had a lot, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
understand that these days there's the Facebook page that has
Yep.
instruments for sale, et cetera, et cetera. There's the old retailers that I think nobody goes to anymore. The
Hmm.
old music stores, the physical
Right.
stores that you'd go to. I mean, that's
Right.
the way it was, I think, when I was, a student. But now it's gone to online, which is fine. They all have good return policies, which is important. You're gonna pick out an instrument sight unseen, literally sight unplayed. They better be able to return it with reasonable, shipping, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera. Otherwise, it's really taking a risk.
Mm. Yeah.
So the last thing I have, and it kind of depends on the player and what they're focusing on or what they want to focus on, is timpani. And to start off with a set of 4 or 5 timpani is kind of unrealistic. So I would say a pair. Just start with a pair, the middle two, whether it's 29, 26, or the old 28, 25. Either way is fine. And number one, because that range, the low on the 28, 29 is an F usually, and then the high on the 25, 26 is a high F. That covers, I would say, 99, 95% of the writing that we get in the symphonic music. Now, of course,
Yeah.
there's contemporary and there's et cetera, other, but just as a good start and thinking again economically, that's a good place to start. Start with a pair of timpani and perhaps a pair that you can easily transport too is another good consideration. Your thoughts, Terry?
I agree. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done with just those two timpani and being able to transport them. And also, manufacturers are making them more portable,
Yeah.
which is great. I used to have to rent a truck to lug some of those things around, but now that I have some portable ones, I can just pop them into my car and go. So again, it's great that there's a lot of choices to be had.
Yeah.
29, 26 is the way to go.
Yeah. And if you are leaning more towards being a timpanist, as in you want to take a lot of timpani auditions, then maybe you don't get the xylophone. Maybe you don't, get an expensive snare drum. Maybe you go more towards the timpani. And again, it's going to be expensive, relatively saying, relative to a triangle, tambourine, cymbals, and it's going to be a lot more expensive. But if that is your passion, and that I'd say you go for it, then you put that as your priority. That's why we said at the beginning, everyone's different. If you're focusing on percussion, then maybe go with the percussion instruments we mentioned. But if you're really focusing more on timpani and your idea is to get a gig on timpani, then you need to invest. It's a good thing if you can to have a set of drums that are your own, that you just get to know the ins and outs of them, and because the repertoire calls for that. So that's to your advantage, but understood that's going to take a while usually.
Yeah.
So our top list here of 6 to 7 instruments, is a snare drum, a xylophone, and this is in no particular order, depends on what you already have. Crash cymbals, suspended cymbal, triangle and a tambourine, and a pair of timpani if possible. We also have a more detailed list of many more instruments because I think the six or seven we just mentioned is a good place to start. But let's say, okay, you've got those, but you want to build. So, again, what area would we recommend you started with? I would say that we'd say the same thing. Well, it depends on what your focus is and what your needs are. So we have a longer list that will not go over every single thing in detail, but I think we'll mention every item in the categories we have and just give you recommendations perhaps on what's important and what's not important. And one thing I would say, Terry, before we hit the list is some of these things, especially accessories, I
Mhm.
would wait until you get a gig. In other words, if you get a gig and you see you need a ratchet and sleigh bells or something, that might be a time to get them because they're not that expensive
Right.
and they might be sitting for a while. If you buy it
Yep.
now, you don't actually need them. So why not put that money in a second triangle or something? So what do you think, Terry?
I agree completely, and that's how I acquired a lot of my things. There are certain things that I wanted, I was itching to buy, but again, I was on a budget, so when the time arose where I needed it, I'd go out and buy it. And like you said earlier, I didn't have to buy new. I was able to find quality equipment that was used, and then I could save my money for other things that were more urgent or
Yeah.
more specialized that I really wanted.
Yeah, that's having patience. That's
Yeah.
restraining ourselves. Oh, but I saw this beautiful snare drum, It's like, no, 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 you've got three snare drums already.
Right.
We all get that. At least I get it all the time. I'll see something go, wow, that's cool. And my wife will, no, no, no. The garage is full of those already. Okay. So let me give you
Yeah.
the categories of this long list. Basically, timpani, drums, cymbals and tam-tams, keyboard instruments, the accessories, Latin percussion, drum set, and miscellaneous. So we've pretty much talked about timpani. A couple of things to add is every professional timpanist needs a stool. Would you agree?
Yes.
If they sit. If they don't sit, they better learn to sit. If they've only got two and they're doing a musical, they're going to do a lot of pedaling. So you probably
Yes.
need a stool. And then I think there's many different options here, but a mallet rack. Some like to
Yeah.
hang their mallets, some put it on a table. So any which way, whatever your
Yeah.
preference is, but you got to put that in your budget too, because that's a necessity for what we do.
And, and Rainer, as far as the timpani stool, if it's possible, the pneumatic ones that can raise and lower,
Yeah.
not just a regular bar stool, depending on how tall some people are. I mean, some of those just don't cut it.
Yeah, it's to your advantage to have an adjustable stool. And with a backrest, I find the longer the gigs are, the easier it is on your back if there's a backrest. Now, I never use the backrest while I'm playing, but
Mm.
whether you have a movement, you're tacit or whatever, it's nice to have that. So again, these are the added luxuries that you can add that on later, perhaps. All right, let's go to drums. And we already mentioned the snare drum as in a 5 by 14. But
Mhm.
also, I think, Tara, you mentioned the piccolo also. That is, especially if you're doing auditions. Well, not especially, but nowadays, this really flat pancake drums are very
Pancake,
popular
yeah.
now. Yeah. So that's something you want to throw in there. And then a deeper drum. For me, it's like a lot of the Shostakovich repertoire, the loud Shostakovich. I
Yeah.
wouldn't start with my 5 by 14. I'd want a deeper drum, a 6.5 at least, to
Yeah.
get that heavy military type sound.
Yeah.
And you got to have a field drum too.
Yeah.
So that's something that, is kind of obvious to us, but your deeper snare drums, whether it's a field drum or an 8 by 15, they can easily double as a tom-tom. So you
Right.
just turn the snares off,
Right.
whether it's in the Bernstein Candide Overture where you need a snare and a tom, whatever piece. You've got to find multiple uses for your instruments. So
Right.
yeah. How
Yeah.
about bass drums for you? What would you say is a good size for someone to have?
Oh boy, I have one. but it's not a full concert size. It's about a 30. I want to say it's a 36 to have in the
Ah,
house.
yeah,
Yeah, it's a good size, right?
yeah.
To have in the
I,
house and not bother my wife.
I always recommend that size as a concert-sized drum for an orchestra. Yeah, definitely. And then all the things that go with it too, as in you have to have a bass drum cymbal attachment as an orchestral player, that you're just going to need that at a certain point. And then the stand, which is critical for me.
Yeah. Yes.
What type of stand that you have, whether it's the cradle folding stand, which is easy to transport, but not the best, I think,
Right.
sound wise. What I like is the circular type stand that suspends the drum so the
Right. Yeah.
drum can vibrate freely. For instance, when I play legato passages, I don't touch the drum or the stand because anything I do touch, whether it's the stand or the drum, actually mutes it a bit. So
Yeah.
having that stand that suspends the drum is great, but of course, it costs more.
Hmm.
So there's a negative side, and it takes up a lot more room too. So
I was just saying, you got to save up,
yeah, it's more
save the
reason to
money.
save. Yeah. And then with all of these, we didn't mention with timpani, but with everything, there's a slew of mallets that you're going to need. So for bass drum, I would say everything from wood, the hardest, a
Mhm.
pair of wood. And then maybe the next pair would be wood with covered with chamois, with leather. And then on down to the biggest, poofiest, softest. You need all of it. I mean, at first, no. At first, if you had one mallet, and I remember a conductor for a student orchestra asked me, if you could only buy one bass drum mallet, what would, I was like, that's like asking me if you could only play up bow or down bow, which one would you pick? I was like, no, that's not the way a bass drum works. We don't use one mallet for everything. But I
Right.
understood there was a limited budget, so I broke down and gave her a general recommendation. But I think the point is we need a variety of sounds, and the
Yes.
conductor doesn't care. They stop and they say it needs to be harder, louder, drier, or boomier, and they want it to happen. So if you don't have a variety of mallets, you're going to be stuck there. So.
Yeah.
All right, so I think the last one in this category is tom-toms, which it's ideal to have a set of 8
Hmm.
graduated tom-toms. Again, it's expensive though, and you're probably going to need a lot of stands, at least 4 stands for 8 drums. But there's certain pieces. Again, I'll use West Side Story as an example that is done a lot, has always been done, and will probably always be done. Such a great piece, and in particular, the orchestras do the symphonic dances. And a lot of times we'll have the drum set player play the tom tom part there. But anyway, you've got to have a set of tom toms. Now you can decide whether they're single headed or double headed or whatever, and if they're
Yeah.
suspended or not. And like I said earlier, you can use perhaps a deep field drum or a deeper snare drum as a tom tom too. But I think it should be a part of every symphonic percussionist's collection.
And I think just thinking now, thinking about the toms and snare drum and the timpani, possibly head considerations, the type of heads that you would want to use for the type of sound and the environment you're in. Are you going to use calf or are you going to use plastic? And then the thickness of the plastic, coated snare drum heads or uncoated.
Yeah.
So many things to consider.
Yeah, and I always consider that to be kind of a personal thing, what your approach to the sound that you're getting. To me, ideally, I would like calf on my timpani, calf on the bass drum, perhaps calf on tom-toms. When it comes to snare, I just prefer the synthetic. I always keep the snare drums tight, really tight for a dry, crisp sound. I don't get that same sound from a calf head on a snare drum, so it's just different. I think it
Yeah.
might be more of a, so we say like in football, an East Coast, West Coast,
Uh,
West Coast professional calling of plays or whatever. But yeah, I do like the plastic on the snare. I don't like it on the other drums though, bass drum and timpani. The problem, number one, is the cost, as we all
yeah.
know, you know. And then the second is the maintenance. So whether you have the calf on the timpani to maintain the pitch can be an issue, whether it's very humid or very dry, very arid. It takes a lot more work, and that takes getting to know your instrument. So if you have calf on your timpani, you need to spend a lot of time with them, just playing on them and realizing, okay, this is what happens with these drums, with the calf heads. This is how much I have to keep correcting the pitch, et cetera, et cetera. So getting to know your instruments is very important with whatever type of heads you have. And that I think we can throw in a little maintenance thing here. So I get asked this quite often. How often should I change my heads? And I always have a saying, if you hear they're bad, it's too late. You've already waited too long. And I know schools will think of a schedule, and I'm of the same. I tell them the same thing. It's not necessarily every year, every 2 years. It's before they start to sound bad. They start to lose their sound quality. And I know for schools and for personal players, it's a difficult thing to have to keep up with changing heads. But again, I think it's really important that you realize that the sound you create is what people identify you as. If you're getting this beautiful sound from whatever, whether it's a tom-tom or a timpani or a bass drum, that's what they connect with you. And if you're not, and it's because you haven't changed your heads in a while or this and that, that could be work that you are losing because you're not, it's not that you're not a great player, but you're not keeping the maintenance up. And I'm glad you mentioned the heads. That's a very critical thing. Again, it's something you have to budget for, or I would think you would budget for ahead of time. Okay, I've been playing on these set of timpani heads, plastic heads for 5, 6 months. I've been playing a lot. They sound fine, but let me order those heads now so that a couple months from now I'll have them. And in case I have the time, I'm going to make the time to actually change them before they're bad. And I'll just keep the old heads just in case.
Right. Yeah.
A lot to
Yeah.
consider. And I
Yes.
always say these are the type of things that, whether it's conductors, administrators, flutists, our colleagues, violinists, they have no idea what we have to deal with. And the oboist will complain, well, we have to sit at home and make reeds all day, and okay. Well, we have our set of issues that we have to
Right.
deal with too. So cymbals we talked about briefly before. So adding to your 18 or 19 inch, probably critical for me at that point, I would say the smaller pair crash. Like you
Yeah.
said, the 17s, the 16s. Whenever we would do the Rachmaninoff, I would always use 16s. It worked very well for me. But whatever, that you want to have that variety. If you've got the 16s, you've got 18, 19, then I would go and get a pair of 20s. I use the 20s as my basic pair of orchestral crash cymbals, like your standard Tchaikovsky, et cetera, et cetera. I would go to smaller for certain things. I would go to larger. 22s would be my standard Mahler cymbals because the orchestra gets so big. And
Hmm.
to use an 18 or 19-inch pair for crashes in pieces like that, like Mahler, etc. I thought I would be overplaying the cymbals, so I would go with a bigger pair for that. But
I'd also like to throw in, as far as the smaller side, maybe even 15s, because I found myself in situations where I would need to do the bass drum cymbal attachment, and sometimes
mm,
15s, I could just take the strap off and pop it on there, and it would work great. 16s as
yeah,
well, but 15s I just felt really comfortable with. It just sort of fit right with the Banda Turkish sound.
absolutely. I agree. Yeah. Save up for those.
Yeah. Ah,
And then in this category, we have tam-tam. So if you're going to be a freelance in the concert world, you got to have a tam-tam or two. It depends on the gig. If it's a smaller orchestra, maybe you can get by with a medium size, whether it's 32 or so. But a full orchestra that's doing, let's say, Carmina Burana, which I think that happens a lot, I would say you need a 40-inch for that. You
yeah.
know, Other repertoire like that, big pieces that you want that big sound. So, and with the tam-tam, a selection of mallets,
Hmm.
obviously a stand, it's all a part of the cost. So, shall we go to the next category of keyboard?
Keyboards, yes.
So I'll let you pick what you would say would come after xylophone, perhaps.
After xylophone, ah, I'm leaning towards probably glockenspiel. Marimba is not used that often. I mean, like you said, in the orchestra, unless we're playing a lot of contemporary. Vibraphone is used, but I think glockenspiel is definitely used a lot more. So I'd go in that direction. Then I would have to consider the size, the width of the bars. That would be my second consideration.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. There's more pieces for xyloglock than with the other mallet instruments in general. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there's many available, and with these mallet instruments, there's choice of octaves. If you can get an extended, so it's not for Glock, not just the standard 2.5 or whatever you want to call it. If it
Yeah.
has the high D, I think that's good. If it goes down below the G, maybe the F, or down to a C, that's even better. Because there are times, but again, if you can only buy the least expensive, then you have to get the standard range. But
Yeah.
yeah, I would definitely say after xylophone, glockenspiel would be the next instrument that's used the most as far as a keyboard. How about after that? What's next?
Vibraphone, because I'm just thinking West Side Story,
Yeah,
Escapades, just
yeah,
standard lit.
yeah. It would be kind of a tie for me between vibes and chimes.
Yeah.
Chimes gets used a lot, but vibes does too as we've gone into the 21st century. So, and both are relatively expensive. That's the
Yes.
problem.
Yeah. And heavy. The chimes.
Right.
Heavy.
Yeah. Especially the chimes are really top heavy. So those are hard to
Yeah.
move around. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're necessary. They're definitely necessary. So the easier one is the vibraphone because a lot of them or some models, you can break them down. They can collapse and fit in the back of your car. The more difficult one is the chimes. But
Yeah.
again, and I think one way to be creative in some of these categories, especially the bigger, more expensive instruments, is with your buddies at school. Perhaps you know a friend whose dad is a band director at a high school and they have access to chimes and they wouldn't mind letting you borrow their chimes for a gig. In return, maybe you come to the school and do a master class on some of the fundamentals,
Yeah.
something like that, whatever you can work out, or someone just owns chimes and they'll rent them to you. I mean, that's okay. That's better than having to buy them yourself or whatever by whatever means. But that's where networking comes in and all the instruments that we're talking about, knowing others that have some of the instruments and perhaps you have instruments that they don't have so you can swap back and forth because it's hard to cover all of the instruments and I would say especially the mallet instruments and expect to have a marimba also. And then we can also talk about space because if you do have a lot of these instruments, where are you keeping them? You
Yeah.
know? So a lot to consider here. Crotales, they get used a fair amount, especially in the more contemporary works and with a lot of the orchestras these days doing the film live performances. Crotales appear a lot in those. So again, I think that's something that if a friend has, I wouldn't buy as
Hmm.
long as I could borrow. And if I get a gig, I get a gig where, I have to have them. I would, if it's my option, I'd hire my friend
Yeah.
to place and have him bring the crotales with him. But again, you have to be creative in that way. And then speaking of the marimba, which, we said it's not written for that much, but it is more than it was, let's say, 30 years ago. I think of the marimba as such an important instrument when you're in the audition world, because
Yeah.
you've got to prepare your audition piece, which is a lot of time it's Bach or whatever. And of course, if you only have it at your school, whether it's a university or high school, that's okay. But it's not like having it at your house or your home where you can play it pretty much at your leisure instead of when it's available at school. But again, the negative there is the price, which with marimba, I think we can say that if you're going to buy one, it doesn't have to be to start a 5 octave.
Right.
4 octaves are very affordable because they don't have that extra octave, so they're cheaper. So I would think that's a good way to start.
I agree. I mean, 5 octave is nice, but it's not necessary. Four, four and a third, you can get a lot of work done on those things,
Yeah,
and they're considerably cheaper,
right.
and more portable as well.
Yeah, takes up less room too.
Yeah, yeah. So
So yeah,
a lot
you
less
get a
room.
5 octave marimba and it creates a lot of issues as far as getting through certain doors. With timpani also, I remember at one school I was at, they had to turn the timpani sideways to get them through a door. And it's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
things to consider there. And again, with all of these instruments, glockenspiel, xylophone, chimes, vibraphone, crotales, marimba, specific mallets. So where do you start with that? Well, I think you start with a very basic collection while you're in school. A lot of your Xylo, Glockenspiel mallets double. They can go either or, which is great. Probably the school has chime mallets. You can use those, but you should get those eventually because they're not that expensive. There are different ones to choose from these days, which is great. And, vibraphone, same as the marimba, I would buy in a set of four as opposed to a set of two, practice and really like them and say, oh, I'm doing a piece now, I need four. Then you buy another pair, but you find that the old pair is harder or worn than the new pair. So that's why I advise that you buy them in a set of four. That way they will wear out the same. What are your thoughts on mallets for the keyboard instruments?
I was talking to a student not too long ago. I was telling them back when I was in school, there wasn't a lot to choose from. You had a few hards, a few softs, and a few mediums,
Yeah.
and now the market is really saturated. So many, but I agree. Just finding an affordable, good quality, middle of the road mallet to just get your bearing, become familiar with the sounds that you want on the specific instrument that you're using, and then when you have a more concrete idea of the sound that you want, the colors that you want, then you can branch off to the different colors and different hardnesses and different sizes. But
Yeah.
I don't think there's a need to get the most expensive signature model right off the bat.
Right.
Save a lot of money just getting good quality, affordable set.
Yep. And a lot of it's personal, what sound you have in your mind, what the feel is. I personally don't care for birch, but I know a lot of players do. I prefer the rattan. I just like the feel of the rattan, how it kind of gives.
Yeah.
But it's personal. It's a personal thing. So, all right. I think we should move on to the accessories, and there are many.
Yes.
We've pretty much talked about triangle and tambourines already. With those, you should have a dedicated triangle stand and or mount because there's going to be many times when you'll need to hang it for whatever reasons, whether you need two beaters or you're playing six instruments at the same time. So a triangle, tambourine, mount, and of course, wood blocks. We need wood blocks, and the same thing, we need a mount for wood block because there are times when you don't have the luxury of holding the wood block up and playing it because you're playing six other instruments too. So,
Yeah.
but variety is great in all of these. In sound, like we were mentioning earlier, I like a lot of the hand hammered triangles. For me, it's a darker sound, still has the overtones. I like that. Tambourine, I like the hand hammered jingles too. I like a lot of hand hammered things. I like hand hammered
Yeah.
timpani. I like the darker sound, but I like the look too. So,
Yeah. Tam
yeah.
tam too. Hand hammer
Yeah,
tam
well,
tams.
yeah, yeah, I like that too. Yeah. So wood blocks, gotta have various sizes of that. Finger cymbals, again, I go to West Side Story, famous part in there for
Yep.
finger cymbals. Various shakers, a whip, which I've seen played many different ways in the Mahler 5. Some I've seen play it as a slapstick, and that's another instrument to me. I think you should have a slapstick. Mark tree, bell tree. The list just goes on. You got to have a ratchet, sleigh bells, got to have wind chimes of whatever, whether it's the tubular or it could be wind chimes of seashells or I've seen it all. So, don't get too exotic at first. But, I think all those are important. I think I even put on my list a log drum. I think that's come into a lot of pieces, again, going into the 21st century. A lot of composers are always looking for different sounds, and that's something that was not used a lot in the past, but I would include that perhaps. That's probably near the bottom. Anything we missed there, Terry, on the accessories?
How about castanets?
Ah, yes. Yeah. I put that in my Latin
Castanets.
group. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that would
And
be that's probably at the top, I would say.
yeah.
Because in part for me it takes a certain technique. It's like tambourine. You think, "Oh, I just pick it up and play it." No, no, no.
Mhm.
I think it's a instrument that deserves a lot more time than
Yeah.
I think a lot of our colleagues have given it. So, yeah, I would definitely put castanets in the Latin accessories group.
And maybe tempo blocks?
Absolutely. Very important, whether it's composers that don't want the woodblock sound, but temple blocks. Yeah. And I recommend you try to get wooden wood blocks. That sounds kind of crazy, wooden wood blocks, but and wooden temple blocks. But they do make plastic of each of
Yeah.
those. Uh,
Yeah.
it's a different sound, at least to my ears. Not as preferable. Now, if I'm playing, and I won't name a composer, but a composer that has this ridiculously loud woodblock or temple block part, I might consider going to a plastic instrument for that because there might be a fear of me cracking, my precious woodblock or temple block. And I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So, but other than that, I would use a wooden instrument and have a mallet that would complement it. So, since we made the crossover there into Latin, obvious would be bongos. You got to have a pair of bongos and a stand. Again, I'm going to always go to West Side Story, as famous bongo part in there, along with congas. And what the hell, may as well throw it in there too, timbales.
Yeah.
So, again, if you have not come across the symphonic dances from West Side Story, you will. You will as a working percussionist. So, they are called for in there. What else in there? Got to have claves.
Ah, claves, of course. Yes.
Yeah. And that's not expensive. So a variety of claves is good. I would say the same for güiro. Again, it's always good to have several to choose from in case whether you're doing a new piece and you're playing it, rehearsing it, and the composer's there. That's not quite the sound I had in mind. In other words, that's not the sound he had on his computer, and they want a brighter or a darker or whatever, a different sound. So have several of those. Same for maracas. Have several pairs if possible, but at least have one pair. And of course, cowbells. We have to have
Cowbells.
cowbells. And this is not the Almglocken cowbells. This is the Latin cowbells, the rhythm keeping cowbells we're talking about. A variety of those would be great to have, along with a mount for many times that you may have to play a cowbell and you don't have a free hand, so you have to have it on a stand or something like that. So we've got castanets, congas, timbales, bongos, cowbells, maracas, güiro, and claves in our Latin section. We missing anything else?
Going back to West Side Story, it doesn't hurt to have a police whistle.
Oh yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's no
For
whistles on my list, but definitely yes. Police whistle. Yes.
comes in handy. You don't want to share that.
No, bring your own. You can throw in a slide whistle there. Also, you can throw in bird whistles. You can throw in
Yeah.
train whistle. There is a Strauss, whether it's a polka, whatever it's called, where you need a train whistle. I forget what it's called, but yeah.
We just did that.
Ah,
Yeah. Okay. I can't remember what it
yeah.
was though.
See, that's the thing. When you do all these pieces in the past, it's gone. But if it's coming up, you know exactly the name of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the Latin category. And then, of course, it's good to have a drum set. You never know when you might need to play the drum set part in the orchestra. Again, you can use West Side Stories as an example. I think we should just call this episode West Side Story and Other Percussion.
Yeah,
But no,
covers
that's a
everything.
famous part. And again, it's done so much. And nowadays, it's done with the movie a fair amount of times too. So to have a basic drum set for that. So I think you need three toms for that one. And, your typical snare, bass, hi-hat, and cymbals, et cetera, cowbell. I think more and more orchestras do a fair amount of pops programs too, whether it's again the Bernstein or other pieces would be very useful to have that. So, and then our last category as we're closing up is miscellaneous things such as trap tables, music stands. You got to have some of your own music stands at your place. Whether they're heavy duty or just a fold up, that's all good. And then with the music stand lights, because you never know when you'll be in a situation where you're on stage in the pit or whatever, and they provide whatever, but it's not sufficient. So I'd always have a stand light that's my own that I know lights up the stand the way I need it to be. So yeah, it's at the bottom of the list, but that's something to consider if you're in a situation like that.
I would also include a good supply of black towels.
Ah, very good. Very
Black
good.
towels.
Yes. Not bright red.
Right. No
Not
flower prints.
right. No flower prints. Well, maybe some people would say, no, you should. Well, you'll get someone from administration pointing out that no, it's distracting to the audience. Okay. So yes,
Yeah.
black towels. And you want to let some of the younger listeners know what the black towels are used for. Not to wipe our sweat.
No.
There may be a few percussionists that don't know. What do you need black towels for?
Oh, they're used for so many things. They could be used for your trap table to set your mallets on, accessories on so that they don't make noise when they make contact on the stand. They can be used to place over a tam-tam so it doesn't have any sympathetic vibrations and sound resonance. If you don't have a bass drum mute, you could use the black towel for a mute. You could use it to prop up certain accessories, like on a tambourine, so it's angled.
Yeah, it should be in every percussionist's toolkit.
Yes.
Let's see. So we mentioned to build a variety on each instrument as best you can and where you see it's needed best, whether it's snare drums, variety of cymbals, triangles, tambourines. It's good to have the options. Contractors, conductors may get to know you as the one that has different sounds, as opposed to another player that they hire that, let's say, they're just limited in their selection of instruments. So you want to do positive things like that. You want to be remembered in those positive ways and not such a negative way. And not that it's bad that you only have one triangle, but it's better if you have options for the conductor, for the composer as they come up. As we mentioned, build a mallet collection on every instrument because it's necessary. And you will find the more experienced you are, the more mallets you will see in our garages, right? Because they're there just in case we need them. We perhaps don't take them all to the gig, but you just never know.
Yeah.
Never know when you're going to need a bass bow.
Mm-hmm.
That's very popular. I mean, it was when I was a student. I remember going to the LA Phil concerts and seeing my teacher, Mitch Peters, and Bill Kraft back there bowing whatever instrument. Wasn't just a vibe, but it could have been, trash can lid, a cymbal. Anything is free range now. So you want to have a variety of everything and super balls too to scrape, rub on the tam-tam or cymbal. I see that a fair amount too. So don't limit what you've got. You want to talk a little bit about cases and for the accessories and the instruments and the mallets?
This is one area I wouldn't go cheap on because mallets are very expensive. Accessory instruments, if you have one, it's one thing, but if you have a lot of them together, you're transporting, that's pretty expensive, and you want to take care of them, so I wouldn't scrimp on that. I have a dedicated bag for just my xylophone and glockenspiel mallets. I have a
Hmm.
dedicated bag just for my snare drum sticks. I have a dedicated two bags for my timpani sticks, a dedicated bag for my bass drum beaters. So dedicated, separated because I have so many and I want to make sure they're protected. Same thing with accessories. I have extra padded cases for any of my accessories. I don't want them just bouncing around in a thin layered bag where they can get damaged very easily. So again, there's a ton of items out there for different sizes, depending on what you have and how much you have. You know, you want to find the right dimension, make sure everything fits nice and snug and nothing is really crammed against each other. But just do the research and find out what's affordable, but also what will definitely help keep your investments protected.
Yeah. What I get from what you said is organized. You sound very
Organized.
organized. Yes.
Yeah.
You've got your own space for snare sticks, for Xylo, Glock, mallets, et cetera, et cetera. So it makes things easier to find, right?
Yes.
And you're keeping like things together. That's a concept I think some people don't quite understand, but instead of having a stick bag that has your keyboard mallets in one
Mhm.
spot, you've got them broken down by marimba, vibraphone, xylophone, etc. Am I correct in that?
Yes, absolutely.
We are similar in that way. And other people maybe don't like us for that, but I don't know. It just seems like it makes sense.
Yeah, it
The only
does.
crossover I see is Xylo and Glock. Some of them I use the same mallets there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it sure makes it easy when you have to pull a pair of mallets out quickly. You need to change mallets or something and you know where to find them, where to look, as opposed to digging through. And I agree, this is one area that you shouldn't cut many corners and buy cheap because you're going to end up buying again, whether it's another bag and or the mallets are going to get smashed or whatever because it's not a good case, etc. So yes, I would say go ahead. Sometimes it's best to spend a little bit more because it's going to save you over the long run. And then with that saying organization, one thing I would like to mention we haven't talked about at this point is inventory, especially easy when you're starting off because you don't have a garage full of stuff that you have to list. But if you can, from when you're starting your career, keep a detailed inventory of what you have and always keep it updated, add what you're getting. It's going to make things a lot simpler for you in the long run, whether it's for a gig or whether it's for taxes or whatever. It's just a good idea to do it. And for me, my inventory list, the columns look something like the quantity of the instrument itself, the model, the size, a description, a photo, which is kind of something new because we all have our phones now and the cameras on there are great. So I just take a photo of everything. The
Mm.
location, which for me is important now because I would have instruments at the Philharmonic, I have instruments at school, and some instruments at home. So it's good to have, okay, I have this snare drum, but I'm not sure where it is. Well, on my inventory, I can find out at least where I last had it. But also put the date you acquired it. This is good for insurance and the purchase price and the value. So I know it's kind of a lot. And by the way, you can go to our website and check out program notes for this. And I will list all of these, all of the instruments we've mentioned, along with the categories to have on your inventory, which will be very helpful for you. So make sure you check the program notes for this episode. But yeah, all of these things help to keep you organized and your instruments organized. To me, whether you're a principal or not, I think these are all good things to do, is because we are dealing with so many different instruments. And as we know, each instrument has its own thing, its own mallets you need. So it's a good thing to keep on top of these things. Maintenance, we talked about a little bit about changing heads. Better to do it before if you can afford it rather than waiting until you've got serious moon craters in your drums. You want to avoid that. Anything else that we didn't hit on, Terry?
I was thinking about this when we were talking about the bass bow. It
Yeah.
might also be good to have, this is probably something that's often overlooked, but just rosin
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and beeswax for the
Yes,
tambourines.
absolutely. So you have to tell a few of the percussionists out there that, okay, rosin, what's that for?
So rosin is for your bass bow, and it helps create the stickiness so that they can grab onto the vibraphone or whatever you're rubbing it against, so that it creates friction and the vibration. So without it, the bow will just slide and no sound would be produced. So
And nobody wants that on stage, whether it's in the rehearsal, or especially the performance. It worked every time in rehearsal, but the performance, nothing.
Nothing.
Silence.
Oh, terrible.
Yeah. And
Terrible.
the beeswax, what do you use the beeswax for?
I use a beeswax for my tambourine,
All
for those
right.
tambourine rolls. Makes it a
Yeah.
lot easier than licking
Yeah.
your finger.
And just for those that don't know, we lick our fingers in part because of the moisture. It's easier to do with moisture on your finger. And if you live, well, not just because you live in the drier temperate zone like I do. Basically, Los Angeles is a desert, very arid. But also, I have dry skin. So even beeswax, I have certain issues with, unless I put a lot on. But I use sandpaper. I use Norton 220 or whatever. I forget the grade. I put that on
Okay.
most of my tambourines, and then it works for me 99.9% of the time.
Yeah.
If I didn't, it would work maybe 40% for me. So, yeah,
Yeah.
these are things that you just implement because you have to do. You've got to perform on stage. You don't get a second chance when it's the performance and nothing comes out. So, that's not a good moment. We all try to avoid having those type of moments on stage. So, yeah. And a good place to find rosin is the bass section. I
Mm-hmm.
never had to buy rosin in my life. The guys, they
Yeah.
always have two or three containers of rosin. And I'm like, you got any extra rosin? Yeah, here, sure, take one. And there you go. That's all I had. I'm not that the rosin costs that much. I'm not trying to be cheap. But,
Yeah.
if they're just going to toss out their old ones, I'll take it. I'll take it. I'll use it. So
Yeah.
keep that in mind if you have a bass player or bass players that are friends. And actually, speaking of that, sometimes the bass players might have an old bow that either they will gift to you or they will, I never use that. You can use it. Just use it whenever you need it, so you don't have to acquire one. Save some money with that. I think we've covered probably more instruments than we needed to, but that's good. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So, for me to summarize, I would just say, be smart and creative in building your collection. Don't go into debt. We didn't talk about financial specifics, but in short, be creative, like I say, and do things with sharing, building a network so that you don't have to put things on a credit card. You don't have to go out and get a loan. And as best you can, make sure the instruments reflect the composer's intentions. Whatever collection you build up, make sure it reflects not only you and your concept of the sound, but the composer, because that's the ultimate. That's what we're doing. We're making music with these instruments. Any final words?
One, make lots of friends.
Yeah, there
For the
you
reason that we
go.
talked about, make lots of friends.
Yeah,
And then also, as we talked about, I think I found that before I make a purchase, I want to know what sound that I want. So I think we, as musicians, of course, it's understood we need to listen a lot to what's possible, how many different sounds, colors can be produced. And I think that'll help guide you in the direction of what you need to purchase because sometimes, I've had students that will go out and spend a lot of money on the newest thing or the most expensive thing, but doesn't give them the desired sound that they were wanting or the sound that was needed for whatever they needed that instrument for. So it's very important to have a sound concept in your mind before making a purchase. You may end up saving a lot of money.
absolutely. I agree 100%. And I know you would agree that when you say have a concept in your head, the concept is best formed from live performance, not so much what you hear recorded, YouTube, etc. That's a start. But if you can hear the instrument live, I mean, just think you're going to buy a live instrument, you're going to play it live. So you want to know what it actually sounds like in person.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Terry, thank you so much. We really appreciate you offering your advice. A lot of instruments, we covered a lot of ground. And another special thank you for all you do for ABOP in mentoring our proteges. It is very much appreciated.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you, Raynor.
That concludes this episode, Sound Investments. Thank you to our guest and ABOP mentor, Terry McKinney. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. Check the program notes on our website for this episode for additional information, including a categorized list of instruments and accessories. Please send your comments and your suggestions for topics you would like discussed. A special thank you to our supporters and sponsors of ABOP's mentorship program. Our corporate sponsors include Black Swamp Percussion, Cooperman, Freer Percussion, Innovative Percussion, InSound Mallets, Majestic Percussion, Marimba One, Malotech, Remo, Sabian, Vic Firth, and Zildjian. ABOP is a nonprofit. Your donations are tax deductible. Check out our website, www.abop.us, for information on how you can contribute. Please follow our podcast and spread the word about ABOP. We greatly appreciate your support. We are the Alliance of Black Orchestral Percussionists, ABOP. Thank you for listening.